Patricia Aufderheide is the author of Reclaiming Fair Use, How to Put Balance Back in Copyright, University of Chicago Press. Professor Aufderheide, what is fair use?
Fair use is the right to use other people's copyrighted material without permission or payment under some circumstances.
Where did that term come from?
Well, that's part of the law, and it's been part of common law since 1841 and part of the Copyright Act since 1976.
What's an example of fair use today?
Well, fair use is done by students everywhere when they quote a scholar or an encyclopedia or Wikipedia or any other source in their paper. They get to use those words as a result of fair use. Journalists do it every day when they say the think tank report said this, quote. They're able to use that material was all copyrighted, but they're able to use it.
Because they source it.
No, actually, sourcing doesn't have anything to do with fair use, although it is always a polite thing to do, to give credit to people. But credit, there's many examples of fair use where you wouldn't even need, you in fact never need to give credit in order to be within the copyright law.
Such
as? It would make people upset if you didn't frequently. But any kind of collage that an artist makes, for instance, uses material from lots of different places and doesn't necessarily cite it. Documentarians use copyrighted material inevitably all the way through their work because the world that we live in is largely copyrighted at this point due to the fact that since 1976, copyright is default. I imagine, did you make any notes for this interview?
Sure.
They're copyrighted forever for 70 years after your death.
Why?
Because it's copyright is default now, and copyright terms have been extended dramatically. So fair use is so important these days precisely because our little world is actually copyrighted. There are very few exceptions. Something has to be very old, for instance, produced before 1923, or it has to be produced by an employee of the federal government on government time and exclusively without any additions from other people, which often happen. And only the federal government, not state or local governments, many states and localities copyright their own documents. So understanding when you can use people's material that's copyrighted in order to quote from it, to refer to it, to produce something new, to access it for a different purpose, that would all be suddenly more important to this generation than ever before, not only because of all of our wonderful digital tools, but also because actually all that stuff belongs to somebody else now.
YouTube. How has YouTube affected fair use?
YouTube hasn't particularly affected fair use. Fair use is exactly the same as it has been. In terms of people's practice, what you see with YouTube, with Vimeo, with Photoshop, with any of the digital tools, GarageBand, any of the tools we now have, is that it's easier technically than ever before to copy. So a couple of consequences of that. Number one, it's more anxiety producing for copyright holders that people could copy their work than ever before. There's a huge difference and a fundamental difference between somebody copying your work so that they don't have to pay you and they can just use it for free. That would be stealing under common understanding and under the law. And somebody accessing your work so that they can make something new or repurpose it for a completely different purpose than your market purpose is. To give you an example, I want to hear the latest Beyonce song and I don't want to pay for it, so I'll just download it. That is illegal and it's stealing. But I want to explore the latest Beyonce video. A French choreographer said, actually, you used my choreography moves in your video and you didn't credit me. And the choreographer was making a copyright charge. She actually was, she was like many people, more concerned about credit. But the choreographer said, look, you used my moves and you didn't credit them. Well, is that true? Do you believe that? You might want to take the section of Beyonce's video, a section that demonstrates a move, and compare that to recorded choreography of the French choreographer and say, on my website, I'm examining this and I'm putting up both of these examples. Now, Beyonce may be singing in that music video, but you don't have to pay Beyonce. You are repurposing a section of her work. You're using the appropriate amount, and you are doing something different with it than just playing her music because you want everybody to hear her music and you really love it.
In your view, Professor Aufderheide, is that French choreographer correct in calling out Beyonce if Beyonce used her choreography?
From a legal perspective? From a legal perspective, she may or may not have had a grounds. I'm not a lawyer. I am very, very proud to have written this book with my colleague Peter Yassi, who also teaches at our school and is a legal scholar, and who is, between the two of us, the person who can speak authoritatively on the law. What I can speak about is custom and practice in using the law, and what the law commonly permits in the application of fair use as communities of practice have defined their use. So was the French choreographer right? It kind of doesn't matter for my example, because my example is you have a right to use Beyonce's work. The French choreographer may be in France making an argument about French law, and we don't really have to worry about the legal issues. The fact that she raised this point creates a moment when I want to say something about Beyonce, and I don't want to have to figure out who her agent is to be able to do this, but I have a right to make that comment. In fact, the law is designed to encourage me any way it can to make new culture. So the law says in part, well, we're going to provide you a perk. If you do make new culture, you can have it. You can have monopoly rights over it for a while. Those notes you made on this interview with me, you can have them for a while. In fact, you can have them for a long while. You can have them for 70 years after you're dead. But if those notes were available to me elsewhere, and I wanted to say, look at the questions that I'm being asked by a television interviewer versus the kinds of questions that I was asked in an email by a print reporter. I want to compare the two. I would have a right to take your copyrighted work in order to make that comparison, because I would be making a comment that had nothing to do with the purpose of your original work.
For whom did you write this book?
I wrote that book for you. I wrote that book for you and other people who just want in their ordinary day to make new culture in whatever they're doing. You might be you might be an amateur musician. You might be wanting to upload a YouTube video and have some or your children might be wanting to upload a YouTube video, and you might say, well, is that going to get them in trouble? Might they have a black mark against them if they do this? There are people creating PTA flyers who want to know, can I just pull an image off the internet or not if I'm going to make this? Is that going to get the school in trouble in any way? As well as scholars, teachers, librarians. The book chronicles work we've done with 10 communities of practice, including journalists, documentarians, filmmakers that is, K-12 teachers, mostly middle school teachers, college professors, and people who make open courseware for higher education. We've worked with them and other groups to help them clarify how they can use fair use in order to get their work done. And as I say, this is a relatively new problem in the world. Since before 1976, actually it was like a no-brainer to access other people's culture because a lot of it wasn't copyrighted.
What happened in 1976?
The law was changed, and as a result of a great enthusiasm by large corporate copy holders to extend their rights over their existing archives, the government responded by extending copyright and by extending the length of the copyright term, by extending the amount of rights associated with it, and by making copyright default. In other words, kind of copywriting our world.
If in this book Professor, you had written about Mickey Mouse and how he's drawn, and put an image in here, would that have been fair use?